How can you get your book published without spending a ton of money? How deep do you need to plan your trilogy in advance? How can you successfully balance multiple POVs in a single novel? Is it possible to query different agents at the same agency? If you've wondered any of these questions, you're not alone. And keep watching because I'm going to answer all of them. Every week, I pull questions from my comments section and do a Q&A video like this to speak to some of your most pressing concerns about writing a book and getting the thing published. I'll give you my insight and take as a professional book editor who's worked with hundreds of authors over the past decade. Let's dive in. And if you're currently querying, make sure you watch all the way to the end because you're not going to want to miss the last question. Here's the first question today. I'm writing a book and I wanted to know how can I get my book published without having to invest my life's savings? To determine how much it may cost for you to get your book published, first we need to talk about which path you plan to use to publish your book. Are you going to self-publish or traditionally publish, or are you looking into hybrid publishing? If you are self-publishing, you will be responsible for all of the production costs that go into your book, including editing, marketing, design, and potentially printing copies. There are certainly ways to self-publish on a lower budget, but you will need to carefully control your finances and keep track of how much you want to spend in each category. If you are interested in traditional publishing, then you don't necessarily have to pay anything upfront. It is completely free to query literary agents. And if the literary agent gets you a book deal, then the publisher pays you. That said, traditional publishing is very competitive, and some authors may work with professional editors like myself before they query to make sure they're putting their best foot forward. But that is not a requirement by any means. Many authors get literary agents without paying any money. Perhaps they have solid critique partners or beta readers that they work with and they self-edit vigorously. Now, the final option is hybrid publishing. And this is admittedly a bit of tricky territory. I have another video that talks about the dangers of hybrid publishing, so I'm going to link that in the description for you to check out if you're considering it. In these cases, you will be paying the publisher for a certain amount of services, typically related to editing and design. But if you are going to pay a quote-unquote publishing house, then you want to make sure that what you're getting from them is higher quality and better than what you could find on your own via self-publishing. There are many fake publishing houses out there, unfortunately, preying on authors and charging them exorbitant fees for really, really poor quality services. So I don't want you to fall victim to a scam like that. So as you can see, how much you spend to publish your book depends widely on the publishing path that you decide to go down. Here's the next question. I've been working on this medieval fantasy novel for over a year now. I've had ideas that could make it span a trilogy, but at the same time, I want to focus exclusively on getting this story done first. It begs the question, do I actually need to plan out a trilogy? If we suppose the ending isn't a closed ending, which my novel isn't, how much do I need to plan out for a story that could span more than one book? Your decision on how far out to plan your trilogy also depends on your intended publishing path. If you are self-publishing, your publishing timeline is completely up to you. You could work on this first installment and put it out there for readers without planning the second installment at all because there's no specific deadline for you to get that second installment written. However, it could be beneficial for you to have an idea for the next installment and even the ending of the trilogy so that you can capitalize on any momentum once you get that first installment published. If readers love it, they're likely going to want the second installment pretty soon, right? So you want to put yourself in a position where you can quench that reader thirst as soon as possible while still maintaining a high level of quality. If you are planning to query your trilogy and it is, as you said, only going to work as a trilogy, that is, the first installment cannot be read as a standalone, then I would say literary agents would expect you to have the bulk of the trilogy mapped out. Because you are going to have to sell the book as a trilogy to publishers in this case, they're going to want to know how the rest of the story pans out, or at least how you plan for it to pan out. So I would recommend at a minimum outlining the other two installments in your trilogy if you are planning to query literary agents. If you're enjoying this video so far, please give me a thumbs up. It helps me know that you're enjoying it and helps out my channel a lot. And if you haven't yet subscribed, in addition to these Q&As, I also do deep dives into specific aspects of the publishing industry and I talk about tactical writing tips you can apply to your work in progress today, so please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on all those other videos. Here's the next question. How common or uncommon is it to start a book with one character's perspective and focus on that for about 5 to 6 chapters, then switch POV to a different character? Is there a trick to pulling that off? Or is it something I should avoid doing? I know there's plenty of stories out there that do this, but in my experience, it's either within a chapter or every other chapter, or done the Game of Thrones way, where each character POV is its own chapter with subchapters. In multi-POV or multi-storyline novels, balance is key. You want to avoid the situation where you are sticking with one POV or one storyline for a prolonged period of time, such that it's jarring to the reader when we switch to a totally different POV, especially if you're introducing that secondary POV quite late in the story. Once you have multiple POVs established, then if we stick with one for 5, 6, 10 chapters in a row, the reader might start to feel itchy to return to that other storyline and see how it's progressing. You also want to avoid the reader having forgotten what was going on in that storyline entirely, because then you're going to have to jog their memory when we do switch over to it. That's why most novels that have multiple POVs do rotate between the established POVs on a somewhat consistent and even cadence. If you're unable to do that in a way that feels organic to the story, then maybe ask yourself if all of those POVs actually belong in the story. If you find the story is much more weighed towards one POV, then is it really just that character's story entirely? Or maybe it's 2 characters' stories rather than 3 or 4 different characters. Really be intentional with your POVs, because the POV really tells the reader who we should pay attention to and who the story belongs to. All right, we have time for one more question today, and it's a great one. Real quick, in one of your old videos about how many agents I should query, you mentioned how writers should pick one agent from each agency. My question is, if there are, for example, 12 agents from the same agency, would it still be all right to query 2 to 3 more of those agents working at the same agency? I'm asking out of the high likelihood that the first agent will reject me. Every agency has their own rules for if and when you can query another agent following your initial query to one selected agent at the agency. Let's break down some of the most common situations. The first is that you can only query one agent per agency, and a rejection from that agent means a rejection from the entire agency. That means that if you get that rejection, you cannot query any other agents there. The second situation is that you can query another agent at the agency once you've received a rejection from the first, in which case you absolutely should go ahead and query another agent whose profile matches your project once you get the rejection from the initial agent. Then the final situation is that you can query as many agents at the agency as you want, and they will consider your query simultaneously. Your best bet is to check the agency's website to make sure you are aware of their rules regarding querying multiple agents at the same agency. Thanks so much to everyone who submitted me a question, and if you have one you'd like to ask, drop it in the comments here and it will be added to my queue for my next Q&A session. If you have a current work in progress, I also recommend downloading my free story self-assessment worksheet. The link is in the description. This is a quiz I designed to help you get unstuck with your story and see it from a new lens so you can really take it to the next level. Downloading that's also going to sign you up for my newsletter Chapter Break, where I'm dishing out exclusive interviews with literary agents and best-selling authors. They're giving some amazing tips I don't want you to miss out on. The links to download your free story self-assessment and check out Chapter Break are in the description. Before you close out, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching, and happy writing.